All right, welcome to part two of the skill tree tutorial. So we'll just continue right where we left off. So I think the first thing we should do here is the actual logic for the skills, and then we'll do the widgets and the UI at the end. I think that is probably the best way. So let's come back here and let's open up BP skill again. So kind of like I was saying before, BP skill is the base class for all the skills in the game. So we want to go to the class settings and then hit this little drop down here. We want to say generate abstract class. And the reason we're doing that is because, like I just said, it's a parent class for all the other classes. So it's not a class that's meant to actually be spawned by itself, like only children of it are meant to be spawned. So for that reason, we're going to make it an abstract class, which basically just prevents it from being spawned. And then inside of here, anything we add to this class is going to get added to all of the child classes that we'll eventually end up making. So for each skill, we want to add a category variable. So hit the variable and call it category, and we will make this a string. And for this variable, we want to set it to private, expose on spawn, blueprint, read only, and instance editable. And again, you'll see why we're doing this in a second, but we want it to be blueprint read only so that when we spawn an instance of a skill, like when we spawn one through blueprints, we can specify this category right when we spawn it. It'll just make things easier. And then we want to duplicate this, and we're just duplicating it so that it keeps all those checkboxes. And then we'll call this the name. And this is just going to be the name of the skill, like, double jump or whatever. And then we want to have a description. So we'll duplicate this again and call it description. And then also we want to have an image. So I'm going to duplicate this again and we'll call this image. And then for this one, we want to change the type to be a texture 2D, like so. And then finally, the last thing we want is something called status. And it's going to be it's actually going to be an enum. So we need to go ahead and create that enum real quick. So let's just come back here to the skill tree folder. And then right here next to the component, let's right click and say blueprint. And we want a enumeration. And we will call this e underscore skill status. And so if we double click on this, we can open it up. And we're going to add 3 different statuses. So hit this new button 3 times. The first one is going to be called locked. So this is when the skill is totally locked, meaning that it's too far down the tree, and you need to first unlock things above it first. And then we're also going to have unlocked. So this means that you've unlocked everything above it, or you've purchased everything above it, and this one is now available to be purchased. And then the final one is going to be, we'll just call it acquired. So this means that you've purchased it, right? So that you actually own this ability. So those are the 3 different states that a ability or a skill can be in. And so we can take this and just save it and close it. And then back over here, we can add our final variable. So we'll say variable, and we'll call this the status. And then we want to change this to be of type e underscore, what do we call it? Skill status, yeah. And then for this one, we just want to set it to private. We don't want to set it to any of the other things. We just want it to be private. And there we go. And then we can start writing some of these functions. Actually, let me think here for a second. It might be better to do... Yeah, it's probably better to do the component. Actually, well, there's not a lot more in here. Let's just finish this up first. So because these are all private, we just want to have some accessors and mutators for them. So we'll just add these because they're going to be pretty simple. So let's add a function up here and we'll call it get status. So this one is just going to be pretty straightforward. It's just going to return the status. So we can take the status, drag it in, and then if you just drag the pin onto the input node, it will create an output for it. And then we can just hook that up like so. And we want this to be pure and const. Compile save. And then we also want one for setting the status. So we'll make a new function again called set status. And then for this one, it's going to be pretty straightforward again. We just want to drag in status and say set, and then hook that up and hook that up. Compile and save. And then we want another one to apply the skill. So hit function, call it apply skill. And so inside of this one, we're actually going to leave this, um, well, we're almost going to leave this blank. The only thing we're going to do here is we're going to drag in the status and say set, and we're going to set it to acquired. And the reason we're doing this is because this function is we're going to override it in all of the child abilities or all the child skills because each skill needs to be applied differently, right? Like if you have a skill that allows you to double jump, you need to, modify the character's max jump height, right? Or the max jump count. But if you have something that causes the player to have more health, and you need to modify his health. So the idea is that the skills are going to get applied differently depending on what the skill actually does. So this function is going to be overwritten in each child skill blueprint, and they can do whatever they want. But all of them need to do this. They need to set the status to acquired, because whenever the skill is applied or purchased or bought or whatever, then we need to make sure that we set it to acquired. So the majority of the code inside of this apply skill function will happen in the child blueprints. Okay, and then the final thing we want inside of here is request acquire. So let's just call it request acquire. And so what this function is going to do is kind of complicated. Well, not really, but basically it's just going to dispatch an event that says, hey, somebody is requesting that this skill be acquired. And what I mean by acquired is like, purchased basically. And when that happens, it's going to go into the inventory component, and the inventory component is going to say, oh, somebody's trying to purchase this skill. Let me make sure that they can actually purchase it, meaning do they have enough points, right? And then if that's the case, it will continue to actually purchase it. But this function is kind of just going to pass things along. So we're actually going to make an event dispatcher. So create an event dispatcher, and we'll call it on acquire request. We'll drag this in and say call. And then if we click on this on acquire request, we need to pass in a couple parameters. So we want to pass in the category and the skill. So we will say a new parameter, and we will call this, or we want this to be of type string, and this is going to be the category. And then we want one more, and this is going to be a BP underscore skill, and we will call this skill. And then you might need to refresh this to get the names to update correctly. Or maybe let's just delete it and drag it back in entirely. There we go. So for the category, we're just going to pass in our category. And for the skill, we are just going to pass in ourselves. And if this isn't making a ton of sense right now, that's fine. Like it will, I'll go back and explain it once we actually get to it. It'll start making more sense once we get everything working together, because this is just kind of one little piece of the puzzle. Okay, so this is actually everything we need to do for this class. So the next thing we want to go to is the actual skill tree component itself. So the idea is that the skill tree component is going to hold on to a whole bunch of these skills, right? So let's open this guy up, skill tree component. And I guess the first thing, let me see. Yeah, the first thing we can probably just write here is a function that goes ahead and adds skills to this map, right? Because we need a way to actually populate this map, because currently there's just nothing in it. So under functions, let's hit the button and say add skill array. And the reason I'm calling it add skill array is because the way this is going to work is that whenever you want to add more skills to the skill array or the skill tree, you're going to add them in arrays. So you're going to add like a full column at once. So if you look at my other project, let me just run this real quick. So each one of these columns is an array. So you have the agility array, the weapons array, and the health array. And it's an array because it's made up of multiple different skills or multiple different abilities, right? You have 4 inside of here, 2 inside of here, and 3 inside of here. So those are the skill arrays, right? So when you add a new skill, you're really adding an array of skills because you're adding it to a category. So you have the agility category, weapons category, and health category, and each one of those categories has an array of skills. So that's kind of the idea. So we're saying add skill array. So that's basically adding a whole category of skills. And so over here on the left, we want to add an input parameter, and it's going to be a type string, and we're going to call this category. So that's the category we're going to add it to, right? Like health, weapons, whatever, and then the actual array itself. So add a new parameter, and this is going to be BP underscore skill. And then we want to change it to an array. So hit this little drop down and select array, and we will call this skill array. And so the idea here is that we want to add whatever they pass in here to this root map over here on the left. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the skills that they're passing in is at least there's at least one of them. So we can say get skill array, and then we can drag on this and say length, and we want to check if it's greater than 0. So we'll say int greater than int, and then we'll do a branch like so, and hook that up. Because obviously if they're passing us an array or an empty array, we just don't want to do anything. So that's all this is checking. And then if it's greater than 0, we want to do a sequence node. So let's hold down S and left click to create a sequence. You can also create one of these by just right clicking and searching for sequence. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to set the status of the first skill in the array to be unlocked, right? Because again, if I run my other project and I open it up, you can see the first skill in each array is unlocked and all the other ones are locked, right? So we just need to go through and set the first one to unlocked. So we will say, let's get the skill array again. So I'm just going to copy this, and we will say get a copy. So this is going to get us a copy of element 0 because we want to just leave 0 here. And we'll say set status, which again is that function we just wrote. We can go look at it real quick. All it does is it changes the status. It's really simple. Let's go back. So we're saying set the status, and we want to make sure we pass in unlocked here. And then once we've done that, we want to add all of these skills to this root node. So let's drag in this root node, and we can say add. And so this is basically asking, okay, what's the key and what's the value? So the key is going to be our category, whichever they pass in. So we'll say get category. And then if you remember from before, so this is the value, which is a struct, which contains an array. So we actually have to say make s skill array, and that will let us pass in a array, and then we can just pass in our skill array, just like that. All right, so now all the skills for that category are added to our root under that category. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to bind to that on acquire request event dispatcher. Because if you remember inside of our BP skill, we added this on acquire request, which gets dispatched whenever somebody's requesting to purchase or requesting to acquire this skill. So whenever they do that, it's going to call this event dispatcher. So we need to actually bind to that so that we're aware of it. So back here in the bottom part of our sequence, let me just scoot this over a little bit. In the bottom part of our sequence, we want to loop over each of these skills and bind to that event dispatcher so that we're notified. So let's just copy and paste this, and then we can say for each loop and hook that up. And so we want to do this for each one. So we can just say bind to on acquire request, like so. And then we can drag off of this event, and we can say create event. And then there's actually an option in here for just say, go ahead and create a matching function for me. So if we select that, it will create us a matching function. And so basically what's happening here is that whenever that event dispatcher gets dispatched from inside a BP skill, it's going to call this function because that's what we've just bound to it. So let's see here. So let's actually rename this to something more meaningful, like on skill acquired. And so the first thing we want to do inside of here is we want to make sure that we have enough points to actually acquire this skill. So we can take our points and drag them in, and we can say int greater than integer. And so we want to check if it's greater than 0. Because if it's greater than 0, then we have enough points. And we can hook that up. So if it's greater than 0, the first thing we want to do is we want to decrement our points. So we'll drag this in and say decrement int, which basically just subtracts 1 from that number. So it uses up a point. And then again, we're just going to make a sequence node. So S and then left click. This is just to keep things organized. You don't have to use these. I just kind of like them. So the first thing we want to do inside of here is we want to find the skill that they are acquiring, and we want to set the state of it to owned because we've just acquired it, or we want to set the state to acquired rather. And then we also want to find the one below that in the tree, and we want to set it to unlocked because, again, let me just run my other project here. So you can see if I click on this extra health one here at the top right, it's going to change it to owned, and then it's going to change this faster regeneration to unlocked. So I click it, so you can see it did two things. So now I own this one, which is what the green check mark means, and it's also unlocked this one. So those are the two things we're about to do. So to do that is pretty straightforward. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get the array that's linked to whatever category that this skill belongs to. So we can drag in our root and we can say find, and we want to find this category that they passed to us. So we'll say category. And this is kind of just narrowing it down a little bit. And then we can break this. Break. And so these are all the skills in that category. So we just need to find the one that equals this guy. And we could, like, I know maybe some of you might be thinking, why can't we just set it directly on this guy? We could if that was the only thing we needed to do, but we also need to know the one that's directly after it in the array. And for that reason, we need to actually find it in the array so that we can find the one after it, which is why we're doing this lookup. Okay, so say find, and we want to find this skill over here. So we can say get skill. And so that actually finds it inside of the array, and it tells us what index it's at. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to say promote to local variable, just to keep things organized. And then we will just hook that up like so. And then let's rename this to be like index, and then I'm just going to put local afterwards, just because I like to do that for local variables. Okay, so this is the index it's at. So we can just check here as a precaution that this is a valid index. I don't know why it wouldn't be, but just as precaution, we might as well check it. So actually, let's scoot this over and let's move this up a little because we want access to this guy right here. So we want to set a, we want to say is valid index, and we want to make sure that our local variable is valid. And so we can do a branch off of this. Let me just trying to organize this in a better way. Something like this. Okay, so if it's a valid index, which again, it totally should be, I don't know why it wouldn't, then what we want to do is we want to get the skill at that index. We'll say get a copy, and we'll say index, and we want to set it to acquired. So we'll say set status, which again is just this simple function right here. And we're going to say set it to acquired and hook that up to the true. And then after that, like I was saying before, we want to get the one after it or below it, and we want to set that one to unlocked. So move this down here. So we can drag off of this guy again. I'm going to make a little reroute node. And we want to, well, actually, we need to first increment this index, right? Because we want the one below it. So we can take this and say increment. So that's going to add 1 to it. And we want to make sure that it's still valid because, like, in this case, let me run my other project real quick. So let's say I unlock this one and then I unlock this one. When I go to unlock this one, like there is no skill below this one, right? There is no ability below this one. So we don't want to try to do anything because, like, obviously there's nothing below it, so there's nothing to do. So we want to make sure that the index after we increment it is still valid. So we can say is valid. And again, we want to pass in the index. And so if it is valid, so we'll do another branch. Then we want to set it to um, unlocked. So let me just move this up here, move this up, and then we'll drag off this. And again, we'll say get a copy. And again, we'll pass in the local index. And we will say set status to unlocked. All right, so that's basically that. And then the very last thing we need to do inside of here is in this sequence node. So let me just move this over. So after we've set the status of the two different skills, we finally want to call apply skill on the one that we just purchased, or the one that we just acquired. So we can drag in, or we can't drag it in. We want to get this skill over here, so we can right click and say get skill. And then we can call our apply skill function like so. Oh, I actually forgot to do one thing. So this apply skill function, it needs to also take in the owner, because that's how in blueprints you actually make the changes. Like, for in this instance, this skill tree component belongs to the player, right? So we need to pass in the player so that when we call apply skill, the skill can actually have access to the player and change things on the player, whatever it needs to change, right? So let's just real quick go back to our BP skill. And then inside of apply skill, we want to add an input parameter. And so let's say inputs. And we want to change the type of this to be actor, because this could be anything, again, because you could theoretically add this component to like anything you wanted. It doesn't have to be the player. So we're just going to say actor, and we will call this the owner. Yeah, so you can see now it has the owner here for apply skill. And so now if we come back to our skill tree component, it wants us to pass in the owner. So we can just drag off this and say get owner. So this is whoever owns the component, right? Okay, so that is pretty much this. So again, we'll just kind of recap real quick what we've done just to give you guys a better idea. So we have this add skill array function, which we'll be calling here soon from inside of the player blueprint. And all it does is it makes sure that the skill array that we're adding has at least one skill in it. If it does, then we set the status of the first skill inside of the array to unlocked by default. And then we add that entire array to our root node at this specific category, whichever one they specify. And then after that, we loop over each one of the skills and we bind to the onAcquire request event, so that whenever they request to purchase or request to acquire this new skill, it's going to go ahead and call this function on skill acquired, which is the one we just finished writing. And then all this one does is it makes sure that we have enough points for it. And if it does, then it decrements a point, so it basically uses up a point. And then it sets the skill that we just purchased to acquire, and it sets the skill below it to unlocked, so that way we can purchase that one. And then finally, it calls apply skill to allow the skill to do whatever it needs to do, and that's going to be totally different depending on the skill. Okay, so that's basically where we are. So let's go to our first person character and actually start adding some skills. So actually, we need to create some skills first. So I'm going to create a double jump skill and a increased speed skill just as an example. And then from there, you guys can create whatever other skills you want. And you should hopefully understand like how to do that at that point. So if we come back here, let's go inside of our skills folder. Let's see, where my skills folder. And then I'm just going to make a new folder and call this agility. So this is my agility category. So any skills related to agilities are going to go inside of here. And so we'll open this up. And then we want to right click and say blueprint class. Or actually, let's actually right click on this guy and say create child blueprint class. It's just a little bit shorter. And we'll call this BP underscore double jump ability, or maybe skill is better, double jump skill. And then let's right click on this again and say BP underscore increased speed skill. And so I'll just take both of these guys and move it into the agility folder like so. Okay, so inside of here, it's actually really easy to set these up. So let's do double jump first. So double click on double jump to open it up. So since this inherits from that parent BP skill blueprint, this guy up here, it actually has like all of that stuff that it needs already. The only thing we need to do is we need to override the apply skill to apply this skill in whichever way it needs to be applied. So in this case, we need to change the player's max jump count to 2, right? So to do that, we can just say override, and these are all the functions that are in the parent class. The only one we want to override here is apply skill. So one thing that's important here is we want to make sure that we keep this parent hooked up, because what this is doing, let's hook this up as well. What this is doing here is it's actually calling the parent's implementation of apply skill, which if you remember back over here, it sets the status of it to acquired. So that's really important. So that still needs to happen. So you want to make sure you keep this here, like don't delete it or anything. And then from there, we can actually do whatever we need to do. So we want to set the jump max count to 2. So we can, I'm just going to create a little reroute node here, and we can say cast to first person character, because we know that this skill is meant for the player. And then from here, we can just say set jump max count, and we will set it to 2. So when this skill gets applied, it just sets the jump max count to 2. And that's all you need to do. And now we have a new skill. And then likewise, we'll do the increased speed one as well real quick. It's basically the same thing. So for this one, we want to increase the speed. So we'll just override the apply skill function, keep this guy hooked up. And then again, we'll cast this to our first person character. And then we will just say, I think it's, or actually, I forget. I think it's inside the character movement component. Let me look real quick on my other project. Yeah, so we want to say get character movement component, and then it's called set max walk speed, like so. And then you can pass whatever you want here. I think I passed in 1,000 before. And so there we go. So now we have 2 abilities. So these are the only 2 I'm going to be creating for this tutorial. But the idea here is hopefully you can see it's pretty straightforward. If you wanted to do literally anything, you just add it inside of this function. And this is a reference to your character or whoever owns the component. The skill tree component is what this value is going to be. So hopefully you can get the idea. Okay, so now let's go back and actually add these skills to our skill tree component. So back in our first person character, we actually want to do this inside of the begin play. So let me find my begin play on my other. Right, okay. So let's see. Begin play, here we go. So we're actually going to make a little, actually maybe we should just make a function for this. That might be easier. Yeah, let's just make a function over here, and we will make it private. And we want to call it, I don't know, like init skills or something like that. And then in our begin play, we will just call this before we create our widget. It's important that we call it before we create the widget, because obviously the skills need to be created before the widget gets populated. So make sure you put this in front. And then inside of here, this is where you will create any skills that you want your player to have. So right now we just have the 2. So I'm just going to go ahead and create them real quick. So we want to right click and say construct object. And then the object we want to create is our BP underscore double jump skill. And you can see when we select that, it populates with all of these different pins that we've selected to be exposed on spawn. For the outer, we want to pass in ourselves, so we'll just say get self. And then the category here is pretty important. So this is going to be like, this needs to be the same for all skills that you want to be in the same category for. So just to avoid having to type this twice, I'm just going to say make literal string, and I'm just going to type it here. So this is my agility category, and so I'm going to pass this in here, and then we'll just pull from this whenever we need it again. And then for the name, this is the double jump. So let's say double jump. And then description, you can type whatever you want. So allows the player to jump twice, something like that. And then finally, we have an image. So, oh yeah, I forgot about this. So the images I got from just some starter pack. Like if you look at my other project again, you can see the images are just kind of random. Like, oops, what's happening? Why did it stop? Let me run this again. Yeah, the images are just kind of random. They're just like random like symbols. I just got them from a starter content pack, but you can literally use any image you want. Like I'm sure you guys have your own images or can find your own images, but I'm just going to cheat and import the same ones I imported before. But again, like you totally don't need these. You can just draw your own in Paint or literally whatever you want. But just so I have something for the tutorial, let's see, what is it called? Yeah, so the ones I'm adding are this Pro Icon Pack. These were free when I got them. They might not be free anymore, but like you don't need them to follow the tutorial. You can literally use any image you want for the texture. So I'm just going to say add to project, and then I'm going to add it to my skill tree tutorial, just so I have something to work with here. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of select random ones. I think for this one, I selected T_arrow. And I don't even remember which one of these it is. I think it was the up arrow. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. And then also we want to create so this is the double jump one. So also we want to create the increased speed one. So I'm just going to copy these two nodes and paste. And then I'm going to change this one to increased speed. And then for the category, I'm just going to hook it up like so. And then the name, we'll call it increased speed. And then we'll change this to allows the player to move faster. And then we will just add another image here. I think I used the fast forward image. There we go. And then finally, we want to add these to our skill tree component. So if we drag in our skill tree component, we can say add skill array, like so. The category is going to be our category, so we can just drag off of this guy and hook it up, like so. And then we just need to pass in these two guys into here. So we can say make array, and hit this little add pin to add two of them. And so this one, we want to go into 0. Just going to add a little reroute node to clean this up. And then this one, we want to go into 1. And so if you have more, like say you want to add more skills to this category, you just copy these two nodes and fill it out the way you want to fill it out. And then you add another pin here and you can pass in as many as you want, right? I'll actually show you my other screen real quick just to show you what I mean. So this is my project that I made before, and this is basically that code. So you can see I'm 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm just doing that for the different categories. So I have my agility, my weapons, and my health category, and that's why I have so many here, right? But I'm not going to do that because these are literally just dummy ones. But I just wanted to kind of show you guys what it would look like. But that's the idea, right? So we're just going to do this right now. So we'll say agility category, like so. I think that is, let me just double check. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much what we need to do to get our skills added to our tree. So at this point, we can probably go and start working on the actual widget itself so that we can actually see them. So let's go to our skill tree widget. And over here, let's delete this button. And we can also delete this canvas panel. Let's see, hold on. Let me open this up on my other one. Oh, actually, we don't want to delete this canvas panel. So actually add the canvas panel back. Okay. So inside of here, we want to first add a border, like so. And then for the border, we want to set it to full screen. And we want to set the offsets to 0, 0. And then for the color, this is basically like the background color. We just want to set it to like, some dark color. Maybe that's too dark. like 0.000, 0.5. And then we want to set inside of here, we want to add a vertical box. So add a vertical box. And then at the top of the box, we want to add a, oh, wait a minute, what? Hold on. Oh, right. Yeah, sorry. We want to add a horizontal box. So add the horizontal box to the vertical box. And then inside of the horizontal box, we want to add two texts. So add a text, add it to the vertical box, and then add another one to the vertical box. And then the left one we want to call, or we want to set the text to available points. So this is how many points you have left. And then maybe actually like a colon and then a space. And then for the second one, this is going to be the number of points you have. So we'll just set it to 1, but we'll be binding to it here in a second. And then we want to center this as well. So for the vertical box, or sorry, for the horizontal box, we want to select that. And we want to select centered, like so. And then the last thing we want to add here is another horizontal box. And then this horizontal box is going to contain our different columns for our different categories. So we'll say horizontal box, and we want to add this to our vertical box. So that way it's below. And then we want to set this to be a variable. So come up here to the top and say is variable. And then let's rename this to something a little bit more meaningful, like skill array horizontal box, like that. And then we're going to have to populate this in blueprints because we don't actually know how many categories there are, right? Because you could add 5 categories, you could add 6 categories or 2 categories. Like it's going to depend on how your skill tree is set up. So we actually are just going to leave this empty and we're going to fill it out in blueprints here and on the graph tab. So actually, I think I added a little bit of spacing. So let me just see here. So like this horizontal box, if you want to make this a little bit nicer, we can add like 20 to the top and then maybe 20 to the top of this as well. Just so it's a little bit spaced out. And you'll see what's going on here once we get it rendering. But this is probably a good place to stop. We can test it real quick though, just make sure that this still shows up. Maybe hit play and we hit P, you can see it opens this up. And if we hit P, it then closes it. And we also did a lot of other stuff kind of behind the scenes. Like it should be adding the abilities to our character or the skills to our character, or at least to his skill tree component, but we can't actually see it yet because we can't visualize it yet. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next part is actually visualizing that tree that we just created. All right, so I'll see you guys in part 3.